Hi, good afternoon or good evening, everybody, with this marvelous landscape that we have here at FinJS this evening. So introducing myself, my name's James McLeod. I'm the Director of Community at the FinTech Open Source Foundation. And to my right, we have Dean Kerr from Scott Logic. And what we're here to present to you today is a case study introducing an amazing contribution that's actually just been made to the FinTech Open Source Foundation Hadouken program. And so the name of our case study is React Hooks for OpenFin. So hands up if you're a member of FINOS. Right, so it's amazing. So thank you everybody for being here tonight and supporting me virtually. And so for FINOS, if you don't know who FINOS are, we're the open source foundation for FinTech and banking. And we bring together a community of engineers and also a community of very innovative thinking to help accelerate our engineering and also reduce duplication and also kind of bring people together around standards, both in terms of repositories and also in terms of technical standards as well. And as you can see from the slide, and as you can see from the hands that actually went up, we have a vast array of big players, such as Citi, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, UBS. Plus, we also have technology companies like GitHub, WhiteSource, Red Hat, and also we have technology companies like Scott Logic, who I'm presenting here today with, and Wipro. So we're a vast array of different communities of engineers and investment. But what I'd like to highlight today is actually the Hadouken program that we run, which is an OpenFin program for our middleware for OpenFin. And this is where the React Hooks contribution that both Dean, Mark, and the team from Scott Logic have actually made a massive impact and can also serve as a real accelerator for all of you React.js JavaScript developers who are actually developing front end for OpenFin. So with this, I'm going to stand back and I'm going to pass you over to Dean.
Thank you very much. Hi, so like I said, I'm Dean, and I guess I'll just jump straight into it because time's quite short. OpenFin React Hooks is a library of React Hooks that was created originally to assist React developers who are working against OpenFin's JavaScript API. So this was created around 5 months ago. And the library's grown from maybe 8 or 9 hooks to a set of 15 now, with contributions both from Scott Logic and from the wider community as well. So these hooks aim to kind of feature a wide variety of use cases, from window manipulation to kind of inter-window communication, stuff that's really common when working with OpenFin. So what were our motivations behind creating this React library? Well, first of all, it's kind of like when React Hooks came along, I just wanted to play with it to begin with, and then found out that maybe it's got some real good use, it perhaps being an abstraction layer on top of the Open API version. We were doing a lot of window manipulation tasks with a few projects I've done with OpenFin, and we were kind of reinventing the wheel with some of them. I know a lot of people have done a lot of docking with Windows. That's definitely to the sides of the screen. So having like a hook that did that for me just made a lot of sense. So it also, if we had like a hook library, not only would it solve the reusability problem, but also have like sort of best practices. Some of the best things around open source is like a community submitted library, community submitted hooks, and that have been peer reviewed and peer tested. Is a lot better than just writing them yourself and then hiding them away in your own little private repo. So that was kind of the introduction to the OpenFin React Hooks library. Now I'd like to give you kind of a sort of a technical journey into OpenFin React Hooks. I'm going to do a little introduction to React Hooks itself, but this isn't going to be like a deep dive on that, so I kind of skipped the lesson part on that. But if you're interested in React Hooks in particular, you can look at the official React documentation and overview. That's really good enough. But if you haven't heard of React Hooks before, despite being quite high profile, they were released back in February, so they're still pretty new, but it's worth summarizing for the people that haven't been lucky enough to play around with them yet. If I was going to kind of condense what a hook is into like a single sentence, I would say it's a function that allows you to hook into a React component state and lifecycle to provide functionality that's more flexible and scalable than what was traditionally possible with the lifecycle restrained approach. If you've worked with React before, it's not always been straightforward. Reusing and sharing logic that is across life cycles you got the classic problem where you may have a component that on mount subscribes to a particular service, and then on unmount will remove that listener. You tend to reach for higher order components and render props in those cases, but that means refactoring and introducing wrapper components, whereas hooks kind of allow you to keep the code that's related to that together and splits it into smaller functions rather than forcing like an arbitrary split on lifecycle. The vision behind React hooks, though, isn't just making it a bit easier to work across lifecycle. The other kind of main point is the fact that it's easy to extract these hooks and compose them together. So I've got a list of some basic hooks there. So you've got use state and use effect, for example. You can compose them together so that whenever you return something from the use state hook, if you put that inside the use effect hook, which has a dependency array, and whenever that variable changes in that array, it'll rerun the side effect. So you can pair a state hook and a use effect hook together to run a side effect on state change. So that was kind of the vision behind hooks, and there's a lot of power and flexibility to that composition model. And what that meant is when it released in February, very quickly, hook libraries came along left, right, and center. There's kind of two distinct flavors to hook libraries. You've got the ones that are built against native web APIs. The example there I've got is use hooks. They've got hooks, for example, such as use local storage. So that lets you parse stuff from local storage, particularly non-primitive variables, a bit more easily than what is currently possible with kind of the low-level implementation you get for free. And then the other flavor is kind of hooks that are based on top of existing popular frameworks such as Redux, use connect here, for example. So that use connect hook lets you do the classic, map state to props from your store and also dispatch actions to the store from your component. So as you can see, what I guess the Redux developers did, we kind of did for OpenFin's JavaScript API. So we're really following the narrative there. And just to hammer the point home, here's how your typical, technical stack would look when you're using OpenFin React hooks. So you've got your React application, you consume OpenFin React hooks, and we kind of sit in between OpenFin JavaScript API and offer you some kind of common functionalities so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So let's take a closer look at one hook in particular, just to get a feel for it. It's a bit of a simpler hook, so it won't save you too much time. So this is the inter-application bus publish hook, which is quite a mouthful. But this is basically it wraps the OpenFin's inter-application messaging functionality, so the communication between windows. So you can see here that we set up a use state hook, which just takes a string called John Smith, and that's the name that's returned from that. We've got a subscribe, which subscribes to a particular topic, which is just a constant called demo topic in this case. And then whenever the name variable changes, we're going to republish on that topic. So here you can see that we don't really need to know the low-level intricacies of the OpenFin API. We can just pull these higher-level hooks out and use them, so it's a bit more straightforward to use. You don't really need to know the inter-application bus back to front. And then at the bottom of that component, we just return an input field that lets you change the name. And then there's a div tag that just shows the received message. So whenever you change that input, it'll be published across the inter-application bus, and the message will update. So here's another example of, what you would traditionally do beforehand without hooks, and how hooks, when you introduce them, makes things a little bit easier. So I've got a component here that needs to worry about whether or not a window is maximized and when it's not maximized, so being restored. So again, it's a simpler case, but as you can see, we've got the classic component did mount, component did unmount, and you've got logic kind of split between the lifecycle methods. This is slightly less readable and more verbose. You've got to manage listeners and clean up yourself. And in a more complex example where you're not just worrying about window maximization and restoration in this component, you may have logic interleaved. And if you're going to interleave that logic, it has to sit in potentially the same lifecycle methods. So when we swap over to just using hooks, so this is the stuff as if you did it yourself, you can see that the logic that is worried about the window restoration maximization is now grouped together in the same block of code. So this, I think, is quite a bit better. And you can kind of get the impression of just how much more shareable it is now. So there's nothing stopping you pulling this out into a separate file, and then just dragging and dropping that into another component, and then you get the behavior around maximization restoration in your other component for free. But you can skip the middleman altogether and just use OpenFin React hooks if it matches what you need. So here we've got a use maximize hook. You can skip the writing yourself and maintenance of it. And it gives time back to development. So this is just a simpler hook, so it might save you maybe half an hour to an hour, but you've got more complex hooks, which kind of can save you a lot more complexity, especially when you've got a dock Windows. Everyone's done kind of like a launch bar. So especially when you've got different screens, it can be a little bit tricky to get that working fully. But we've got like a community-reviewed one that's been kind of tested in production quite a bit. So stuff like that is quite a big win. So that's pretty much the technical introduction. In terms of what next, my motivation for this talk was kind of twofold. One's to kind of raise awareness for the hooks library, but another is to kind of encourage contributions back. So if you've got any ideas for hooks, maybe you've worked with OpenFin quite a bit and you've got some ideas where you think, I've been using this functionality here and there across projects. Why not think about contributing it back to the library? So we're on GitHub now, under the FINOS organization. So if you've got any ideas and you just want to drop them by, there's the issues board. We've got a roadmap for a couple of bugs and first-time bugs to take a look at. Or you could even just fork the repo yourself and submit your own hook. The kind of world's your oysters here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Over to you, James.
It's brilliant. So as you can see, the team at Scott Logic has actually made a really big contribution to React hooks within OpenFin. And so if we have any JavaScript developers who work in React and you want to contribute some new hook ideas, or even come in and start using the hooks that are already in there, then as Dean said, you can actually find this contribution within the FINOS organization on GitHub. But you don't need to be somebody who's just contributing in order to be a collaborator in FINOS. So if you want to come and either check out the React hooks and clone local, check it out and raise an issue, or just come up with new ideas, feel free to come along. We're at finos.org as well. My name's James, and getting in contact with me is actually really easy. So it's james@finos.org. And finally, at the end of this month, on the 20th of November, if you've got team members over in New York, we have the Open Source Strategy Forum, where people can come along and hear about this idea, plus many other ideas and other contributions that we have in FINOS as well. Thank you very much.